Brought to you by Midnight Sun Mining.
Alasdair Macleod, welcome back.
Thank you for having me, Peter.
It's a shame every time we talk, there seems to be another huge geopolitical event that's happened that seems to be quite destabilizing. Obviously, the latest with Iran. We spoke back in January after the Venezuela um, kidnapping incident. I don't know what you'd want to call it. There's different words for it, but this is extremely different. This isn't a kidnapping. This is a serious military campaign that looks like it potentially could get dragged out. I asked you back in January if the way that you looked at and your outlook for the rest of 2026 was vitally different afterwards, and you said it was to an extent. I guess I'm going to ask you the same question now. How much does this change your outlook for 2026?
Well, I think what it does is it changes timing more than the eventual outlook. I mean, basically, we are coming to the end of a period of fiat currencies. That, to my mind, is evident if you look at the facts, if you like, the real facts, and if you analyze them properly rather than just following your nose while it's on the grindstone, as it were. I think that, basically what's happened by Trump starting this ridiculous attack on Iran, whether it's at the behest of Israel or not is immaterial. But the fact that America has got involved is the worst political decision, I think, probably taken by any president in the history of the United States. This, remember, was meant to be a war which was going to be over a weekend. And here we are in the third week. And I can tell you that if you look at what the Americans are saying, is completely at odds. And also the mainstream media, including our mainstream media, is completely at odds with what geopolitical expert analysts are actually saying. And a lot of these guys have regional knowledge, which extends into intelligence and everything else, who understand that the task, if you like, that America has taken on. America's not going to win this. It's as simple as that. And we can already see that Trump is, chickening out. Taco. Trump always chickens out. I mean, what he's doing is he's saying, he said, we'll go in, first of all, we'll go in and we'll beat the bastards over the heads and we'll kill this and we'll kill that and all the rest of it. All he's done is he's killed civilians. Okay, he killed the leader as well, but he's just killed civilians. The military side, which includes, incidentally, an army of 1 million people, 1 million military soldiers, is still intact. It's still there. It hasn't been hit. I mean, okay, a few missile launchers have been hit, a few dummy aircraft maybe have been hit, airfields have been hit, that sort of thing. But the military has not been hit at all. And what the Iranians have been doing is they have been lobbing, if you like, old ordnance at Gulf states and Israel. And we're talking about ordnance which was dates back to 2013, 2015. And that basically has taken out all the interceptors. Basically the Israelis, the Americans, and also the Gulf states have run out of missile interceptors, and drone interceptors. Okay, they've taken them out. The next phase is that we'll start seeing the more modern stuff, which travels at Mach 7. I mean, we're talking about hypersonic missiles, which these guys have. That will start attacking. We've also seen a bit more evidence, because obviously this seems to be all under a D notice. I mean, for non-Brit viewers of this, a D notice is basically a ban on publication about a particular subject. And this particular subject is the extent of Iranian attacks on Israel and also American bases around the Gulf. Americans who say, "Oh, we had an accident with 2 planes over Kuwait, but the pilots are all right." Okay, they were shot down. I mean, and it's not friendly fire. This was Iranian. And what happened to that tanker which crashed, killing 6 crew? that was shot down. I mean, the delusionary aspect of this war through the press, propaganda, and all the rest of it is completely at odds with the reality. And now I think it's going to start. Now, my view is that Trump is already backing out because, from his point of view, the war wasn't meant to last more than 3 days. And okay, there's been a lot of bluster and all the rest of it. He then unwisely says, we'll go in and we'll ensure that ships can go through Hormuz. We will send in carriers, Navy, whatever. We're shipping sort of, if you like, experts, sort of commandos or equivalent, if you like, from the Pacific to go and take Hormuz. And I think he's sort of suddenly been told by this Pentagon staff, look, mate, this is not going to work. An awful lot of Americans are going to get killed. So what does he then do? What does he then do? He turns around and says to his NATO allies, come on, you've got to send your stuff in as well. Peter, this is going to be a repeat of Gallipoli if they do it. I mean, this is just crazy, absolutely crazy. And Trump's problem is that he's now got to try and find a way of backing out. But even if he backs out, as far as the Israelis are concerned, Satan, which is what they call the Americans, has got to be driven from the area. They will continue. And any sheikdom in the area, kingdom, sheikdom, or whatever you like to call them, which hosts American military bases, is going to continue to be pummeled. And very, very accurately, because the Chinese have a spy ship, if you like, in the Gulf of Oman, literally feeding all the intel that they need for accurate precision strikes. I mean, basically, the Americans are going to be driven from the area. And of course, we haven't had the other nice little bomb, sort of bomb problem coming up, and that is the Houthis, who will block out the Red Sea. Why is that important? Well, the only stuff that's getting out of Saudi Arabia is via a pipeline that goes to Yanbu. So, and that's on the Red Sea. So that's going to be blocked to the southern end. Okay, you might be able to send some ships in through Suez, as long as they're not too large to go through. But, Peter, this has only just started. It really has. And the consequences for the price of oil, that again has only just started. And if this goes on well into April, and in my view is going to go almost through the whole of this year, or however long it takes for Iran to achieve its objectives, then who knows where the oil price is going to go. And the other problem, of course, is that the refining process of reducing oil into downstream constituents means that things like nitrogen, sulfur, and all the rest of it are not being exported. And we were talking about huge, huge quantities. And all this is feedstock into fertilizers. And, when do we need fertilizers? At the beginning of the Northern Hemisphere's growing season. We need it now. And so suddenly, the fertilizer is not going to be there. And with intensive farming methods, which rely on fertilizer, modern fertilizers, we're going to have food shortages. So, when you see the Office for Budget Responsibility say that, we think that this is going to add 1% to the inflation rate by the end of the year, shock horror, they're not thinking this through. They're nowhere near what's going to happen. So this, Peter, is an enormous disaster. And in financial markets, it's going to drive up bond yields. We've already seen UK 10-year government gilt is knocking on into new high ground, just about. But it'll go there. Germany is already there. And France is already there, new high ground with their oats. You've also got Japan. I mean, basically, if you look at G7 bond yields, they are all shooting up, going into new high ground, or will go into new high ground. And that at a time when leverage plays in the market are so prevalent, like, private equity and stuff like that. I mean, this is a financial disaster. It is a real disaster. It's going to crash markets, particularly equity markets, which are very overstretched relative to bond yields. And what does the Fed do? I mean, does the Fed follow its inflation mandate? Or does it participate with the US Treasury in trying to rescue the banking system and everything else which might be falling over? Tough choice, but I know which way it's going to go, because the political mandate is quite clear. You basically got to rescue everybody. That's what's going to happen. So the dollar is going to be debased. It's the end of the dollar. And the point is that while I didn't have a timeline in terms of how long it would take for the end of the fiat dollar and the currency system based on it, now we can pencil in a year or two, no more than that.
Just before we get, I do want to touch a bit more on the bond market and the implications of potentially higher inflation and whatnot. Is essentially what you were just saying there. But this seems very different to Venezuela. Obviously, Venezuela, he had, after Maduro was captured, he already had lined up a successor, the vice president. He had control. There was actually, in a way, there was a lot more intelligence behind that by the looks of it, in terms of the succession plan and how that would then evolve afterwards. This doesn't seem the same. It doesn't seem like there is an off ramp, and the idea that a lot of people are talking about Trump being able to just put his hands up and say, well, we've won, we're going to get out of here. You can't really do that whilst the Straits aren't open, and if Iran still have capability to attack ships in the Straits, right? So is there an off ramp that you can foresee at all?
I can't really. I mean, the other problem, which we haven't mentioned, is Israel. If America withdraws from the region, then Israel is very, very vulnerable. So what does Israel do? I mean, as a last resort, it probably deploys nuclear weapons. I mean, we don't want to think about that. But there is no doubt that Israel is basically fighting for its survival in all this, and that is why it has corralled America in. That is why the very, very powerful lobby groups in America have pushed America into this, very much against the Pentagon's. The military, if you like, in America knew that this was a crazy, crazy thing to do. But the political imperative, driven by Israeli pressure groups in America and all the rest of it, lobbyists, was for America to go in there and, ensure the survival of Israel, which, is planning for a greater Israel so that it has got, complete control over the region. That is now failing. It's like, it's like a poker hand where, you're playing with a pair of twos and you bet that everything you've got, that's going to be the best hand. And Iraq comes out. It's been planning for this since we overthrew Saddam Hussein, because it observed what happened there and thought, we don't want this to happen to us. And so since 2003, Iran has been building its military capability and its missiles technology. I mean, it's way ahead of us. We've been very, very slow to innovate our technology. I mean, we spend billions on new, sort of fighter jets and all the rest of it. But we ignore the army. We ignore the navy. What have we got the navy now? Actually, nothing. And America is actually quite similar in the sense that it's driven by existing defense contractors who basically like to, send the stuff out to wherever, Europeans trying to defend Ukraine against Russia and so on and so forth. They don't have the real pressure to innovate their weapons technology. The result is that the weapons technology that the Iranians have is in many senses superior to anything we have in the West. And, this is the craziest thing that anybody's ever done to attack the Iranians. And there's absolutely no plan behind it. It's sort of regime change. I mean, come on. And then, Peter, there are no words to describe the stupidity of this whole thing. And it's going to, the other thing which I would like to point out is that China obviously game planned this well in advance, which is why I think back on February the 9th, it turned round to its domestic institutions and banks and insurance companies licensed to hold US treasuries and told them to sell. Why was that? It knew what was happening, obviously. I mean, you've just got to join the dots, and that's the only conclusion you can come to. So where does China go from here? I mean, basically, I think their attack is financial, and their attack isn't directly against the dollar. It's basically protecting themselves. And I've argued for years now that this was the end game, if you like, for the dollar. And China needed to protect itself from it. And I think that's what we're now seeing. I mean, we've seen the opening of vaults outside China, SGE vaults, and where gold can be exchanged for yuan. You've seen the CIPS, the Chinese international payment system, working very, very well, doing away with the use of the dollar as an intermediate stage in all foreign exchange transactions. China is now. She can literally turn around tomorrow and say, right, the exchange rate for trade settlement purposes between gold and the yuan is X. That's it. And at that moment, the dollar just dies because that's the only protection that fiat currencies have. And when China does it, the West is finished. I mean, it really is. The financial system is over. The derivative system, I mean, we're already seeing, the bullion banks and others trying to get out of the silver contract on COMEX. I don't know if you've looked at the turnover there. It's just dwindled and dwindled. It's never been this low for prolonged periods. And not only that, but open interest recently hit the lowest it's been in the last 20 years. We've had this wonderful bull market in silver. Has any speculator bought into it in the West? No. The only speculators who have are in China, not here. So, I mean, basically, the system is already ripe to be just fall over, and that's been brought forward and giving us some idea of closer timing by America's ridiculous operation against Iran.
The world is starving for copper. AI data centers, EVs, and renewables, unprecedented demand is exploding, while new meaningful supply is nowhere in sight. In most places on Earth, discovering a 1 billion ton copper deposit is extremely rare, often 2 kilometers underground at the top of the Andes, simply too deep to ever be economic. But in Zambia's Domes region, billion-ton copper deposits are the average and sit right near or at surface. Ivanhoe's Kamoa-Kakula, 1.4 billion tons at nearly 3% copper. Barrick's Lumwana, 1.6 billion tons at 0.52% copper. And First Quantum's Kansanshi, over 1 billion tons at 0.66% copper. With Midnight Sun's Dumbwa deposit, we're on track to deliver Zambia's next major copper deposit. Our Dumbwa deposit started with the largest and highest grade soil anomaly ever recorded in Zambia, 20 kilometers long, peaking at 0.73% copper in soil. And this geologist is our secret weapon, Dr. Kevin Bongo, Midnight Sun's COO. He took Barrick's neighboring Lumwana mine from 900 million tons at 0.5% copper to 1.62 billion tons at 0.5% copper in just 24 months, giving Barrick 62 years of mine life and paving the way for their $2 billion super pit expansion. Now he's applying the exact same methodical approach to Dumbwa, where he believes it has the potential to reach the same scale and grade. Drilling has already delivered nearly 4 kilometers of drilled strike length, with hits including 1% copper over 22 meters, 0.98% copper over 15 meters, 0.89% copper over 25 meters, 0.46% copper over 50 meters, and that included 1.36% copper over 6 meters. With 5 drill rigs turning and 10,000 meters drilled per month, We're on track to define the first half of this 20-kilometer system by the end of 2026. MMA on the TSXV. We're Midnight Sun Mining. And we're aiming to deliver Zambia's next major copper deposit when the world needs it most.
What does that look like, though? Because we've had this chat quite a few times, right? I mean, I still find it, in my mind, that it's maybe even similar to the 1970s. You're going to have perhaps much higher inflation if this continues out. You'll have a lot more devaluation of the dollar, sure, but a fiat collapse. Okay, there's going to be a lot of money printing. There's going to be a lot of perhaps more safe hedging towards gold and potentially other things. But the idea of the fiat system collapsing, what would that realistically look like? Is that even possible?
Yeah. I mean, it's inevitable. It's not a question of possible. Every fiat currency system has collapsed in the past. This one is in the waiting room. It is, if you like, it's in the funeral parlor, let's put it that way. I mean, your reference to the 70s is interesting because the 70s and this decade basically are bookending the fiat currency system. I mean, the fiat currency system survived the 70s but only just. And the reason it survived is because you had a Fed chairman in the form of Paul Volcker, who said, we got to rescue the dollar. It's obviously sliding. We have to raise interest rates to whatever it takes. And he raised in those days, I think it was the prime rate, up to 19.5%. He killed the savings and loan industry. I mean, that all fell apart. But it stopped the inflation and led to a period of stability with declining bond yields, if you like. I mean, they fell. But even that long period between 1981 and sort of 2016, even that long period sowed the seeds of the destruction of the dollar. Because what happened was you had the first real carry trade developed, which basically was, you would lease gold at 1%, sell it into the market for dollars, invest the dollars in T-bills, which were giving you anything from 10% in the early days and sort of declining down to 5% by the end of the last century. And you leveraged it up, and it was wonderful. But, of course, where did how did you get your gold back? Well, the answer is you didn't. It just rolled and rolled. And, I've quoted this so often. Frank Venerosa, analyst, looked at this. He spoke to people, who wouldn't talk nowadays because the whole subject has become so sensitive. But in those days, he could talk to all sorts of people, including the head of foreign exchange at the Bank of England, who I knew personally. I used to lunch with him occasionally. And he concluded by around about 2002 that between a third and a half of all official central bank reserves had gone out on lease. And the way he put it was, and it's probably adorning the necks of Asian women. Now, he was right about it going out on lease, but there are two things in here. Firstly, it didn't go out and adorn the necks of Asian women. Because, I mean, if you look at India, for example, the Gold Act, I think, whereby gold was restricted to, it was illegal to import gold. I think that was about 1992. No, China was in there picking it up. So China bought all that gold. Now, who actually leased it and hasn't got it back? Well, it's quite clear. It's the Americans. So they don't have the 8,130 odd tons, which they claim to have on the US Treasury's balance sheet. No, most of that's gone. And indeed, we had this confirmed because they also raided the earmarked gold held in the New York Fed. So, I mean, we discovered this when Germany said, "Oi, we'd quite like a little bit of our gold back." It's going to take you 7 years for us to deliver it to you, was the eventual agreement. So, when we go back onto a metallic standard, which incidentally was all set out in Roman law, which is the basis of our common law recognition of the difference between money and credit. And I don't care what governments say, that is actually still the position. I mean, the answer is that America does not have its gold to defend the dollar, even if it wanted to go back on a gold standard. And that is why successively people who have become, gone from outside into government and been appointed, if you like, in positions of responsibility, have started off saying we need to audit the gold. And when they get into position of responsibility, suddenly, stum. And that, Besant, very good example. So, this situation is very, very bad for the dollar. So we're now in the final stage. So we've had the first bookend, and now we've got the second bookend. And quite frankly, I think that what we're seeing in terms of what's driving things in America and will drive things is politics, not economics. And it's just amazing if you reread the history of the collapse of the Weimar Republic and the Reichsmark, the similarities with what's going on today. I mean, okay, different circumstances, but the similarities of what's going on today from the political end are very, very similar. But I would say that the people who presided over the collapse of the Reichsmark actually had a better grasp of economics than the economic establishment in America today. So in that situation, there's, anyone who thinks, oh, can't possibly make that sort of error. Well, of course we will. We're already seeing it too. I mean, rising oil prices, everybody's jumping out and saying, oh, we'll subsidize it. We'll make sure that the poor, can buy their heating oil or their gas or whatever. But then you've got all the food. As I said earlier, the Gulf, as a byproduct of its petrochemical business, produces something like, up to half the world's sulfur, which is the basic element that you have in phosphates. And you're looking at urea, something like a third of the world's production of urea comes out of that. There is going to be a shortage of the fertilizers upon which we depend for our food production. The inflation effect on food prices is going to be enormous. What will governments do? Well, you can put all your money on one outcome, and that is they will rush to subsidize. So you get subsidized prices, which increases demand against a limited supply. What happens to prices? They go up. What do governments do? They print the money to ensure we can pay the higher prices. You don't need to be terribly clever to see this stuff. That's where we're going. And ultimately, it is the destruction of the medium of exchange, which is fiat currencies. That's going to happen. And the moment China, turns around and says, right, we've got a fixed exchange rate, we're fixing the exchange rate between yuan and gold, then, goodbye dollar.
I think this is obviously why Trump is, I guess, panicking to an extent about the Straits, right? It seems like he didn't even think about this before, or maybe he thought they didn't have the capability. I don't know, but and asking his allies to now help out. But it's essentially what you're saying there. Obviously, not only just the oil, but the phosphate. Oh, sorry, the sulfur. It's disaster. Obviously, they need it open as soon as possible. In this scenario where they aren't open, we're obviously seeing bond rates go up already. You've already almost pretty much answered it there at the end there, but it is when you're saying a year out, 2 years maximum for this to all collapse. What do we expect? Are we expecting that US debt? Obviously, they're repaying so much in interest already. The higher these rates go, the more unaffordable the debt becomes. It then becomes, but essentially, most of the revenue then becomes on repaying debt rather than servicing the country. and you ultimately have a collapse via that route. Is that what we're getting to?
Yeah, basically, it basically means that the debt is unfundable. And the only way in which, from a balance sheet point of view, that the Fed can work this is short-term finance. So what it's doing, but essentially, is it ends up giving the government and banks and businesses cash, uh, in return for cash. I mean, you effectively have cash and near cash on one side and near cash on the other side of its balance sheet, because there's no way it could be able to fund anything out along the yield curve.
This is quite dangerous, though, isn't it? Because obviously the Jerome Powell will be gone. The new incomer seems like he will still lower rates if he can. But if you're going to be borrowing all on the short term, and then you also have an oil crisis and inflation gets out of control, you're going to be borrowing so much on the short term, which you've eventually. I don't see a way around it. How are you not going to have to then increase rates to tackle inflation? But then you've also borrowed so much on the short term that if you increase the rates, it's going to cripple you. So what do you do?
Well, the answer is you follow the political imperative. And the political imperative is basically support the markets, support the banking system, do whatever it takes in order to do that. In other words, you trash the dollar rather than face the reality of a completely broken system.
Scary. What, how much of so let's say, for example, in terms of the everyday, because it is quite serious at the end of the day, isn't it? What we're talking about here. I mean, this isn't,
Damn serious. Yes.
yeah. So assuming that the straits do stay closed, obviously we saw the IEA have released about 400 million barrels of oil. Obviously, Biden did reduce the reserve quite a bit whilst he was in office. Trump did say he was going to pick it back up. I don't think he did enough by the looks of it. I think he only got about 5% increase in his first year. US are now down to 243 million barrels of oil. It's the lowest since 1982. How long can the world, and in particular the US, obviously they are the largest producer of oil, though, so you've got to bear that in mind. But how long can they sustain themselves? How long can the world sustain if the straits do stay closed for a prolonged period of time?
Well, the problem isn't so much the 400 million barrels of oil, which the West has agreed to to release to alleviate.
No, I'm more thinking about the reserves, right?
Yeah.
So
No. I know. No, they're talking about they're going to release 400 billion, but they can only reduce 400 million barrels. They can only produce something like 2 million barrels a day out of a total global demand of around about 106, 105, 106. It's nothing. I mean, it's a pinprick. Because there's no, I mean, when you cut, it's the flow rate you've got to look at rather than that lovely big total. I mean, the big total actually is 4 days global supply. But I think the point is that they can only release something like 2 million barrels a day, which is slightly less than 2% of the total, against something like 30% of the world's oil being no longer available. It's a pinprick.
Although I do agree with a lot of what you said, the only hole I can find in the argument that this particular incident, I just want to theorize it with you, is that Iran aren't as strong as you're saying, so that they're not withholding all their ballistic, they're not withholding all this capability. There is no major strategy there, and the US can somewhat walk away from this in the next 2-3 weeks. Is there, in terms of when you were saying earlier that Iran militarily are just as advanced, if not more advanced, how much evidence is there for that, and that there is a, because at the moment the narrative is that their missile output is down 90%. A lot of their missile stations are being targeted. They've been destroyed. Obviously, the leader's dead. A lot of the generals are dead. They have appointed the son, but no one's seen him. Is there a chance still that the US could still invoke some sort of regime change that is in their favor?
Well, Peter, that's what we're being told by the media. Okay. But if you talk to the geopolitical analysts who, if you like, really know the country, really know the region, you end up with a completely different story. The idea that the military has been badly hit is rubbish. If you look at what the Americans and the Israelis have actually targeted, they've targeted the cities. They're killing civilians. They're not killing soldiers. There is a 1 million strong military force there. You've got a population of 92 million people in a country the size of Western Europe. For a long time, they have been preparing, ever since we took out Saddam Hussein, they have been preparing for an attack from America. So they have evolved their weaponry. They have evolved their entire systems. I mean, remember, not so long ago, they were the first people to actually supply drones to I think it was Russia or one of the sides in that.
No, they did in exchange for gold, actually.
Yeah,
they did, yeah.
Absolutely. So, what they have done is they have buried in tunnels most of their missile capability. And not only that, but, it's a very mountainous territory. What they have done is they have taken out local radar, like in Bahrain and Kuwait and so on and so forth. They've destroyed that facility so that the Americans can't really see what's going on. They can only rely on satellites and pray that there's not too much cloud cover. At the same time, the Chinese have put a 30,000-ton observation platform in the Gulf of Oman, which can see everything which is going on and give very, very precise targeting to the Iranians. I mean, the Iranians have prepared for this. This is not something which, is going to go America's way. I mean, it cannot. They were so stupid to get involved with this. And as I say, Taco, okay, Trump always chickens out. And I think we're beginning to see his nerves wobbling, when he says, oh, we need a bit of help through the Hormuz. The latest thing, I couldn't quite hear it, but he was recorded on his presidential plane saying that, really, we didn't really have to go in there in the first place because we're sufficient in oil. It's actually the other people who are doing it. Oh, come on. This is him beginning to sort of taco, I think. The fact of the matter is that from Iran's standpoint, you've got to put yourself in their shoes. They want to get rid of Satan from the region. And so they will bomb all the sites. They have got hypersonic missiles. We know that. They have got very, very sophisticated anti-ship missiles, which they have yet to deploy. I mean, they're managing this actually quite carefully. And if you go into Tehran, the city's pretty much empty. I mean, they're not totally empty, but I mean, the traffic jams have gone and all the rest of it. Why? Because people have left the city for the very obvious reason that the city itself is being targeted. And as I understand it, and I'm hearing this from geopolitical experts who have proper information on it, that this is deliberate, that basically they've told the people, move out of the cities because they're the ones that are getting bombed. And then you had this crazy thing where they bombed this girls' school in the south of Iran and killed, 165 children and their teachers and all the rest of it. And the Americans turn around and say, oh, it's the Iranians doing it themselves. Oh, come on. I tell you, the amount of information which we have in the West is actually zero. It is so bad. It is just complete propaganda. Everybody should open their eyes and actually understand what's going on. And as soon as you understand that the propaganda is no more than that, it is complete lies, then be frightened of the consequences.
Well, this is another media talking point at the moment is, and you were talking about how this is actually a positive for China potentially down the line, right? one of the main
No,
talking
no,
points in the
no,
media
no,
is
no,
actually
no,
how
no, no, no. Sorry. I need to correct that. It is not a positive for China. China is protecting herself. That is the key. She wants to protect her own currency from the inevitable collapse of the dollar. And her moves, if you like, have been very, very much in that direction. She's taken the simple approach. Why interrupt America when it's making all the mistakes? I mean, I think
oh yeah, I mean, it's
a
had
key
that approach for
example.
the last 5 years or so,
Yeah,
hasn't it?
yeah, both. I mean, forever. But a key example of this was the rare earth incident back in late September. Uh, America, Trump threatened, I think, 145% tariffs or something. So the Chinese turned around and said, "Okay, well, we're not exporting any rare earths." That was almost, it wasn't quite, but it was almost the first proactive move that they made against America. What we didn't know at the time was that it wasn't just rare earths, but at the time, China took the view that it should stop exporting silver as well, which is why the silver price took off. And literally within 2 or 3 weeks, there was a delivery crisis in London because the liquidity suddenly wasn't there. The Chinese obviously took the view at the time when the Americans decided that silver was a critical mineral. Why supply Western markets when America, if you like, will be trying to stockpile this new critical mineral? There's no point. And this, the new licensing thing, which applied from the 1st of January for 2 years, was just smokescreen.
What do you think about the idea, though, that if this did go on, obviously we were saying what the ramifications would be for the US, of course, with higher inflation, what might happen to bond yields, obviously the debt trap that they're in and whatnot. But in terms of China, obviously they do rely on a lot on oil exports coming out of the Strait of Hormuz, don't they? Probably a lot more than the US does. They did also downgrade their economic forecast. I think 2 days into the war.
Yeah. Well, the first thing I would say is forget economic forecasts. They're all rubbish anyway. But when you look at China's oil position, she's actually got a lot more oil security than, say, we have. I mean, obviously it affects it. The other thing that's happened is that because China has this relationship with Iran, her tankers can pass through Hormuz without any problem at all. And I don't know if this is actually true, but the latest story I hear is that the Iranians are taking the view that any tanker which takes oil which is paid for in yuan can go through. So, in other words, this is something which Iran is focusing very much on attacking its enemies rather than its friends. So, does China have an oil problem? Well, I mean, there's a bit of disruption, yeah, but it's not that serious as far as they're concerned. And not only that, but of course, Russia is ready to up its supplies. There are limitations as to what Russia can do because it delivers oil by pipelines. And, again, you got the flow problem that we have, if you like, with the 400 million barrels. We can only get it out at the rate of 2 million a day. So, it's not a completely clean argument that China isn't affected, but the consequences for China are less than they are for the rest of us. Where the consequences really are, I think, is in terms of international trade, and that is obviously going to affect China. But that again is why China has, if you like, taken the lead along with Russia in assembling reliable trade partners in the form of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization membership and also BRICS. But there's a big question mark over BRICS now because India, in effect, has broken ranks. I think it's meant to host the next BRICS conference, though I can't confirm that because I haven't actually looked it up. You sort of wonder, how that's going to go. My view is that, whether it's BRICS or not, is actually immaterial. China will choose who she trades with. Her private sector will choose who they trade with. America is not a major market for China anymore. She's got bigger markets elsewhere. And this has been a genuine change in direction, if you like, ever since Trump came in, and indeed before.
Yeah. How are you reacting to what we're seeing in the metal, sort of precious metal side of things? Obviously, we've seen a bit of a pullback in gold. It's sitting around $5,000. Silver's pulled back a bit from where it was, from about 90 to 80. Not massive retreats really. But at the same time, some people might have imagined that actually these metals might have gone up as a result of what's going on, not down. But on what seems more drastic is that we are seeing a larger sell-off in the mining equities and equities in general. How are you looking at it? Is this a buying opportunity of mining equities or metals in general? Are you looking at it as yeah? What's your take on it?
Well, stackers rejoice, I think, is the answer when it comes to the physical metals. But to answer your question more seriously, I think when you get a crisis of this sort, the immediate move is into perceived security, which is the dollar, because it's liquid, it's big, it's liquid. So what do? You rush out and buy dollars. And if you look at the dollar's trade weighted, it has indeed risen from 96 to about 101. So I think that's a lot of the answer. Inevitably, once people actually sort of think things through, you find that there's a backwash out of the dollar into the precious metals. And we saw this in the wake of the 2008-9 financial crisis, when gold fell from around about $1,000 down to a low of 680 before going on to 1920 or something in September 2011. So this is, I think, normal behavior. The first wave is into the dollar, and of course, the professionals, if you like, in the market, the bullion banks running positions, and the large hedge funds will look at this as an opportunity to get prices down so that they can buy these metals at discounted prices. So that, I think, is the initial effect. And when you look at the mining sector, I mean, the mining sector has been running very, very powerfully. So if you're, let us say, losing money on your Nvidia or your Tesla or your, Microsoft or your whatever it is, then what do? Do you sell the things you're losing money on? No, you don't. You sell the things that you made a profit on, and that inevitably, I think, is putting pressure on the mining stocks. So that would be my view. Again, I mean, if you're a trader in mining stocks, you count up to 10 and then just buy the socks off it.
Yeah. How much do you think? Obviously, some of the reason why the gold price has cooled a tiny bit or a little bit would be, I guess, expectations that perhaps the Fed won't be reducing rates anymore. You were mentioning there that you do sometimes see these sell-offs before the next leg up, right? Are you expecting that we might see a bit of a pullback in gold, depending on how long this goes on for?
Well, I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, I don't forecast prices. That's the first thing I must make clear. But I wouldn't be surprised because, I mean, even though, I will claim, I hope you believe me, that I got a better understanding of what the hell's going on than the average investment manager. We have to bear in mind that the average investment manager is a macroeconomically driven individual. And macroeconomics is a false economic science. It doesn't actually exist in reality. So consequently, everybody in the investment game is basically making decisions which are divorced from reality. Eventually, that sorts itself out. As they say, the market always gets it right in the end. But there are quite long periods where the market gets it horribly wrong or goes to places for completely the wrong reasons. And when you get a chaotic situation such as we have at the moment, then that's what's going to happen. It's quite simple. there are big lies being told. I mean, for example, they talk about speculators, getting out of gold and silver. Now, come on, the speculators do not have positions in gold and silver. They're minimal. I mean, just look at the open interest in silver, which I referred to earlier. If you look also at the longs, if you like, in the COMEX longs in the gold contract, they're as low as they've been for some considerable time as well. I mean, the net figure obviously is slightly changes, because then you're looking at the other side of the transaction as well. So, yeah, we've seen this before. It produces volatility which is unreasonable. And I'll give you another example of where the whole thing is mispriced. If you look at, if you understand what gold really is, gold is final settlement. It is real money. Everything else is credit. This was originally said by John Pierpont Morgan back in 1912, and it's still true today, even though nobody thinks it, but it is true. The long-term purchasing power of gold is remarkably steady. Okay, now, so how do you explain the situation where, if you look at the value of base metals measured in gold, they should be not too far away from that steady level. But actually, if you look at an index of base metals, it's around about 25% of that long-term value. In other words, what fiat currencies have done is they have concealed a substantial decline in the value of base metals. Those base metals will normalize. So even without a change in the purchasing power of the dollar, you are likely to see base metals rising on average by roughly 300% to get back to normality. Now, if you put on top of that a declining purchasing power of the dollar, then who knows where it goes? In other words, I mean, and this is true of all commodities, incidentally. I've just taken base metals as an example. But food is an interesting one. Agri-products, as it were, are an interesting one, because that similarly is depressed. And so we are likely to see in real terms a substantial rise in their value. Not only that, but with the shortage of fertilizers as a result of this ridiculous attack on Iran and their response, and the closure of Hormuz. And at the same time, I mean, what's that going to do to food prices? Even if there is no further decline in the purchasing power of the dollar, or sterling, or the euro, or the yen, they're going to go through the roof. I mean,
and it compounds with oil going up as well, right? So you've got
absolutely
food prices going up, plus the oil and the transportation costs going up. It all, yeah.
Well, absolutely. And the logistics. I mean, for example, one of the problems with the closure of Hormuz is that vital ships' bunkers are now no longer available. I mean, somebody, I think it was a professor of trade finance or something, trade or whatever. I think it was in one of the London universities, that tells his students that, oil basically is a component of over 45,000 prices, one way or the other. I mean,
it would be. Yeah. Well, that makes sense, doesn't it? Because you need it to. Anything that is transported, or most things, is based on oil.
Yeah, it's not just transport, but we've just been talking about fertilizers, for example,
and energy prices as well.
Everything. Exactly. So oil goes to what, $200, $300 a barrel, $400 a barrel. I mean, basically, what we're looking at is something like $400 a barrel, just to return to where it should be, priced in real money. And I would say that, basically this closure of Hormuz and the whole of this stupid war situation is just accelerating the process. It's not changing the direction of anything. It's that, the idea that oil is going up only because of the Middle Eastern problems is is actually an error. It's something which people need to understand, that oil and also all these other basic materials are wildly undervalued because of the consequences of a fiat currency system. So, and not only that, but once prices start rising, because governments will try and subsidize the lot, which basically means that demand for them continues while the supply doesn't. Demand accelerates while the supply collapses or is restricted. It's basically going to collapse the value. In other words, the purchasing power of fiat currencies, and this is reflected in inflation. I mean, I would not be surprised at the end of this year to see inflation approaching 50% in most major currencies. Yeah, why not? Look, if these currencies are going to not exist in 2 years' time, that basically means inflation, which is a silly metric, is infinite.
What would the bond market look like towards the end of the year if the straits stay closed, do you think?
Well, once we go through that sort of 5% level in certainly sterling, certainly also US treasuries and so on and so forth, there is no limit in terms of how high the yields will go. I mean, I would not be surprised to see them go, by the middle of this year. I wouldn't be surprised if they were well over 10%. Could be even further.
By the end of June, above 10%. That would be, I mean, that in itself would be quite.
Yeah, look, this is a crisis. We need to understand what happens in a crisis. This is a collapse of the purchasing power of currencies being brought about by a mixture of distortions in the system to date and a ridiculous war, which is accelerating the decline of the purchasing power of these currencies, because it will accelerate the rise in the value of oil, the shortages, develop shortages, and therefore accelerate the increase in the value of the food inputs that we need at this time of the year, at the beginning of a growing season. This is going to be terrible, and it's something which can't really be concealed by, if you like, statistical method, which has been very successful in restraining the apparent rate of inflation, CPI, and all the rest of it. This is no fun. I mean, I would say that for years and years and years, you had the lunatic fringe saying, "Oh, well, it's time to stack, fill your larder with baked beans and all the rest of it." Well, actually, that's now probably coming true.
Surely governments wouldn't let that happen. They'll just have to do an insane amount of QE, buy the long dated bonds and get the yields down, right? Like they're not going to let
long dated. I mean, if you rely on foreigners to buy your debt, then there's no hope, and your domestic institutions will forget it. Don't worry. This is all going to be financed on the back of short-term money. Yeah, it's print. I mean, QE will be infinite, of course.
So it'll be QE, but buying short-term.
Well, because they won't be able to. I mean, look, okay, the Fed could go in and buy long-term debt and try and drive it down, but I mean, they'd end up buying the whole bloody lot.
Well, yeah, which they could do, yeah.
Destroy their balance sheet. I mean, more rapidly than anything else. I mean, if I was Jake Powell under these circumstances, I would be sort of looking at it from the point of view of providing liquidity into the market. So I'd be doing short-term stuff. I wouldn't be going out along the yield curve because I got no control over it. I mean, the reason that the Fed has got such big losses is because it was going out along the yield curve until 2020. And then, of course, you had that very sharp rise in inflation, and therefore bond yields rose as well. And the Fed ended up with egg on its face. I don't think it would go there again. I mean, I could be wrong, but it seems to me that it would be the most stupid thing. It just makes
Perhaps you're right. Yeah, I just can't imagine they'd want to let rates go up that high. So maybe it's the lesser of two evils is to print your way out of it.
what I'm saying, Peter, is they got no control over the situation. I mean, that's the reality of it. So what do? I mean, do you let people go bust and say, well, we can't handle this, or do you just trash the currency? It's inevitable that's the option they will take.
Yeah, but the economic, like, would most people in the US, in the UK, would not be able to afford mortgage repayments if rates went up this high.
No, of course not. They can't. And they can't even afford them if they rise by 1%, let alone the sort of levels we're talking about. I mean, I think that's another example of where governments will turn out and they will try and sort of help, if you like. So they will suppress mortgage rates. They will lean on the banks not to foreclose. The banks don't want to foreclose anyway, because I mean that just makes the crisis worse. So there will be some sort of guarantee to mortgage lenders to offset the problems of suppressing the rates at which they lend, because I mean they've got to go into the market and fund mortgages. So I think government will set up, let's say, a mortgage funding arrangement whereby they print money so that the mortgage lenders, if you like, have access to funds which will prevent them or allow them not to go and force foreclosures or just go.
I could definitely see that. I just also think they again, the amount of debt interest that they're going to be needing to pay if these rates go up too high as well at the same time.
It's a debt. It's a debt.
Yeah.
Snap.
But this would speed it up by an incredible pace if what you're saying did happen. Yeah.
It's a financial crisis in the making, and it's just getting harder and harder to avoid or to put off. You remember they used to talk about kicking the can down the road.
I mean, yeah. Well, it seems like we're at the end of the road. Okay, interesting. Well, look, I think everyone sort of has to hope that this can come to a resolution as soon as possible. Really, don't they? That's really
Don't bet on it.
where we are.
Don't bet on it.
No. Well, Alasdair, really appreciate your time. Thank you so much. And I hope what you say does not come to bear. But
incidentally, so do I. But it's getting impossible to justify the positive argument.
No, I actually agree. Yeah. No, Alasdair, really appreciate it. Thank you.
My pleasure.